She's the author of Becoming the Natural, a story about one of the best fighters of all time in Randy Couture, and also the co-author of Let's Get It On, about arguably the best referee in the business, Big John McCarthy. She even finds time to write for a little magazine called Sports Illustrated. Loretta Hunt, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Trevor. How's it going?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
I'm going to start off by asking, when you write a book about a legend like Randy Couture or somebody like Big John McCarthy, how much are they actually putting pen to paper on this one for you?
Well, it's actually all their words. I'm really hired to help facilitate the story and help get their thoughts in order. And where I can leave the text as is, it's left in their own words. And then sometimes I will go back and I'll interview them, much like I would do, a magazine or an online interview with someone, and I try and fill in the gaps with a little information that will kind of flesh out the story and answer any questions that the reader might have. So it's always their story. It's always them. I'm more assisting them and fine-tuning it so it can go out as a book.
You spent a lot of time with Randy Couture, obviously, to do the book, and he's had a huge falling out with the president of the UFC. So can you just give your impression of the character of Randy Couture? Because UFC President Dana White was not exactly nice about his departure.
Yeah, well, I think, I think people have come to learn, about Dana White and when he falls out with someone, right? He tends to do that with a lot of people, and the reasons all seem to have to hover around business. So, he's saying what he's saying, because he's a businessman, and he doesn't want fans following Randy over to Spike TV and watching their programming. When he wants the UFC to be the only MMA programming that anyone wants in town. But in terms of like their real relationship, I've seen maybe a little bit more. I've been privy to a little bit more than, say, the normal fan would have been. I haven't seen everything, but knowing Randy throughout the years, him and Dana White's relationship has always been, it's kind of been a roller coaster. There's been good times, and, there have been times where, like we see here, where they don't get along. They've been in and out of, a business / friendship relationship for, a dozen years. So it's just like any other relationship. You don't get to see all the little things that happen and all the little nuances. At the end of the day, really only Dana and Randy knows what happened between them, and that's that. So I would just put a word on it and say it's complicated. Like any other human relationship, it's complicated. And, no one can compartmentalize it in just one little neat little box, and I think they'll probably end up talking again, down the road. That's the way it goes.
You beat on the wrong end of Dana White's hysterics. Put yourself in his shoes. If you were the president of the UFC, would you carry on or conduct your business the same way he does, by airing out dirty laundry in a public forum?
I think it's something that's to some degree worked for them, right? It's gotten them some attention. I think the question is now is this the type of attention that they want now that they've moved to a bigger platform? They seem to give a lot of ammunition to, social groups that have a problem with MMA to begin with, and now have a problem with them and the way they conduct themselves, the way they allow their athletes to conduct themselves, things like that. I don't know. I would listen. I'm not a promoter, and I don't want to be a promoter. It's not a fun job. I can definitely tell you that from what I've seen in this business. It's not an enjoyable job at times, and I don't really have the characteristics one needs to be a promoter. But I guess in a little more time, we'll see if the way Dana White and Zuffa are running the UFC, if it'll work on that bigger platform, on the Fox platform.
She is a New York Times bestselling author for her work with Randy Couture and Big John McCarthy, as well as an NFL and MMA reporter for SportsIllustrated.com. You can find her on her company website, SI.com, or on Twitter at Loretta Hunt MMA. Loretta, you were one of the first female MMA reporters. How was your reception when you first got into the scrum with the other men?
Well, it was a lot smaller when we started. I started reporting in 2001, early 2001, and I was the only female, like among like maybe six guys. So it was the press corps was a lot smaller. And I'll be honest, I think I got a lot more attention in terms like when mainstream outlets would come in and want to talk to a reporter or someone that kind of knew the sport. I think I got picked a lot of times because I was female. But over the years, it's kind of evened out. It's become a lot more just competitive in general, male or female. The bars has risen a lot, and you have to be really hard, like in any other type of writing or journalistic endeavor. You have to work really hard and get better, or you won't stick around. So it's been challenging. I think at this point there's been some positives and negatives to being a female journalist in this sport, but at the end of the day, I'm just a journalist. That's what I see myself as, not really a sex.
I think this is the perfect time to talk about the historic main event for UFC 157, Rousey versus Carmouche, the first ever female fight, let alone main event in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Rousey has been on the big stage before, Strikeforce champion as well as an Olympic champion. Was this as big of a deal for her as it was for the UFC and the media in general?
Yeah, no, it was really big. I think the place where we're going to see it was the most influential for her is in the mainstream. I felt like right going into the weekend, she kind of tipped into the mainstream. I think the UFC is hoping that she'll drag MMA along with her a little bit, and that remains to be seen. But in terms of Ronda Rousey, she went big time this weekend. There's no other way around it. And you're just going to see a lot more of her in, a lot more different venues. You could see her in film. You can see her on TV now. I mean, she's going to have whole projects based around her. I read somewhere a couple days ago that like they're looking at like a makeup line for her and things like that, which I think is actually super clever because she's really good at doing her makeup, her eye makeup. But you know what I mean? Like she's becoming like a celebrity, we might just start calling her Ronda by one name, and that's that. And that's where this fight it really helped her. It was culminating for the last 2 years, and it all came down to she became the first woman in the UFC, and that got an immense amount of attention.
What's next for Ronda? Is she going to, do you think McMahon, Tate, or Zingano are next for her?
Well, I guess the UFC's already announced that the winner of that fight gets Ronda. Is that correct? Or
that changes on a daily basis.
Yeah.
You know that. They announce it now, but who knows 2 weeks from now, right?
I mean, are you asking my prediction of Tate Zingano?
Yeah.
You know what? I'm not really super familiar with Kate Zingano, so I would have to really review her first to know. I can see just in terms of marketability, the Tate fight there's already some backstory to that. They've already fought once before. They trash talked each other, and this would be a good experiment to see how the public handles women trash talking one another, because we didn't see that in the Carmouche Ronda fight. The Carmouche Ronda fight was like a feel good story, right? Everybody was a winner walking out of that. But I think we're going to have to see how the mainstream handles two women talking trash to one another. They might not like it as much as two women star athletes, supporting women's MMA, all that, the first fight. But in terms of who I think is going to win, I don't know. And then I know they announced Sarah McMahon has a fight coming up too. So, if something happens and Zingano, Tate, maybe someone gets injured, who knows? You know what I mean? Maybe it's going to be the McMahon, Sheila Gaff. That's the woman she's fighting, the German fighter. It could be the winner from that fighting Ronda next. So, but they're all setting it up, and I think we're going to hear about more women's fights getting booked. Maybe this week, next week. So there'll be a few options, I think.
I was speaking with Frank Trigg, and he said that McMahon versus Rousey is going to be bigger than, say, Anderson Silva against Chris Weidman. What are your thoughts on that?
In a way, it definitely has a story. It's two Olympians. female Olympians fighting one another. So that's another first. And we don't get to see many Olympians, male Olympians fight each other, especially in like a championship bout. None come to mind, although there might be one out there. It's definitely rare at the very least. So that whole storyline is very interesting, because they can build Sarah McMahon as a woman that's, basically gone through the same trials and tribulations that Ronda Rousey has, just in a different discipline, And some will argue that wrestling's the better discipline than judo for MMA anyway. So it's definitely a big storyline. Will it be the biggest fight ever? I don't think so. I think we just saw that, and just because of the precedence it was setting, I think it was this last fight.
You're watching The Weekly Show with Trevor McManus. Live via Skype is SportsIllustrated.com writer and New York Times bestselling author Loretta Hunt. You can follow her on Twitter at Loretta Hunt MMA, on the Sports Illustrated website, SportsIllustrated.com. Going to take a few Facebook questions here, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay, first one is about pound for pound best fighter in the world. I'm not a huge fan of this question, but it has to be asked by all the fans. So, because in my opinion, there's a huge difference between 55 and 70, and then 70 to 85. And so Corey Marshall asks, will we ever see either Jones Silva or Silva versus GSP? And who do you have as your top three for pound best fighter in the UFC?
Yeah, it looks like Silva GSP is the one that they're going for first, but I think we'll know more after George St. Pierre defends against Nick Diaz in a few weeks. We'll see how that fight looks. And then from there, we'll probably figure out which, and then obviously John Jones has to fight Chael Sonnen. So once those two hurdles are done, I think the UFC is going to make an assessment and see which fight is better. But I definitely do think one of them is happening this year. UFC needs a big fight like this year to kind of get back on track. I think last year was the first year in a while where they didn't make massive profit. And the pay-per-view numbers were down. It's been a little bit of a growing pain situation moving over to Fox. So yeah, definitely one of those fights is happening for sure. And then the second part, they were asking
your top three pound for pound.
Right.
Well, let's go in no particular order. Or, let's make it interesting. Let's say, who is your top three in straight ascending order?
That's the three super fight guys. Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, and John Jones. I think if we were to go 1, 2, 3, Anderson Silva seems to be the best balance of skill and then also experience. So I'd have him at number 1. I guess George St. Pierre would be number 2, and then John would be 3. However, in terms of like just raw ability, athletic ability, John Jones would maybe be number 1.
Next Facebook question. This is probably going to be the easiest answer you've given all day, let alone all week. A Facebook question from Joe Barthwaj. He asks, will my boy Mark Hunt ever win a UFC title?
You mean my brother, Mark?
Yes, sure.
My brother, Mark, I would be very surprised if he's fighting for a title. But I don't want to spoil anything because I know someone didn't watch a particular UFC over this past weekend. So I won't say anything. But I think it's God, anything is possible, but I really don't see that happening. Sorry.
Good answer. And finally, Travis Richardson asks, what happened to Dana and Tito boxing?
Oh, yeah, that was like a long, convoluted type thing. Like just down to bare bones. They had agreed that they were going to box each other. And it came down to last minute. There were no contracts in place in terms of like if it would be filmed, who would sell it. And Tito didn't want to do it if there wasn't any contracts in place. He's not stupid, he wasn't going to go in there and let Zuffa shoot it all and then edit it the way they wanted it and then sell it for money, put it on Spike or something. So he wanted a contract in place and he told that to Zuffa. And then, the weigh-ins didn't happen. Tito didn't show up to the weigh-ins, and then Dana kind of just ran with that he didn't show up to the weigh-ins. But it was more over just some contractual stuff wasn't done ahead of time, and the whole thing was kind of silly anyway.
She is the author of Becoming the Natural, a story about one of the best fighters of all time in Randy Couture, as well as Let's Get It On, the story about Big John McCarthy. Where can we find your books?
They're in what's remaining of the bookstores across the country, as those go by, unfortunately. And you can get it online. It's, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those other places. You can pick it up, and you can pick it up on your iPad and all that too.
And you can find Loretta Hunt on sportsillustrated.com and follow her on Twitter at Loretta Hunt MMA. Loretta, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure. Thank you, Trevor.
Awesome. Thanks so much again for the mix-up.
No, it's all right. I thought Thursday was Wednesday, and I stood this guy up, and so now we're even, right?
Yeah, we'll call it right down the middle.